it's important to understand too the origin of so-called Semitics. Again, that's a term that's really a mixture of the Indo-European invasion and the autochthonous, if you will, African or Africoid populations of Africa itself, the Near East, and of course what we would call Arabia.
Can I jump in there, sir?
I'm sorry?
Can I jump in there, sir?
Yeah, please, yeah.
Yeah, there's a theory which is actually now mainstream that says that Semitic comes from Africa, not the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
What's happened is, as people have looked at languages in countries like Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, that kind of region, there's a theory that is now developing that what's called Afro-Asiatic is a group of languages, and their origin is somewhere in and around Ethiopia. So some people think it's to the north, more Eritrea region. Some people think it's more to the south, Ethiopia, Kenya region. Some people think it's more the Sudan region. And the languages that come out of that is Hausa, which is in northern Nigeria, ancient Egyptian, Cushitic is more or less Somali, Berber, which is the language of the black folks in the desert, the Tamashek speakers in the desert. And all of these languages are ancestrally from one place, and that one place is somewhere in and around Ethiopia. So this is what that means. The theory that Sheikh Anta Diop had, which is that Semitic people were a mixture of Africans and Europeans, that now might be an old and outdated theory, because the new position seems to be that Semitic originated somewhere in East Africa, and the place in East Africa is somewhere around Ethiopia, Eritrea, Kenya, and Sudan. So Semitic is from one of those places. And consequently, the very first Semitic speakers would have been sub-Saharan Africans. And the only thing is what we don't know is, did they look like Ethiopians? Did they look like Eritreans? Did they look like South Sudanese? And that's the discussion. It's they would look like one of those three populations. So this is changing the game, because what it means is we now no longer have to concede Semitic. And so the people that today call themselves Semites, they've got some explaining to do.
Yeah. It comes out of an African language, and I think that gentleman was Greenberg. I'm not sure of his first name, but
correct.
The linguistic, that was his theory originally, and it's being accepted by more and more people. And it's called Afro-Asiatic, but it's really African, and that offshoots into Asia, etc., etc.
And it's a shame that he called it Afro-Asiatic, because that's propaganda. That's propaganda. It should be East African origin family, full stop.
Yeah. But it's a concession to the previous theory. So that it can be accepted by scholars. So interesting.
Greetings. My name is Robin Walker. I'm also known as the Black History Man. I am perhaps best known for my 2006 book, When We Ruled. Based on this book, I'm launching a new online history course aimed at you, the adults. You could be a parent, you could be a teacher, a mechanic, cleaner, professionals, care workers, security guards, taxi drivers, kitchen workers, entrepreneurs, tech heads, lawyers, all of you. We want people from all over the world to be empowered by our content. We want you to gain mastery over your history and heritage. And you can do this by subscribing to our course. Click on the link to get this powerful, life-changing material.
One of the interesting movements again, is into India, because I find it interesting, because I was a bit of a student of Buddhism, etc., and Eastern traditions for quite a while, without necessarily knowing the connection. But again, if you go through Mohenjo-daro and Harappa and the indigenous civilization, and you learn a little about the origins of Indian history, and the conflict that existed then between the Indo-Europeans and the Dravidians, which were the original inhabitants, and of course the eventual conquest, and then almost liquidation, or destruction, shall we say, of the original civilizations. A lot of the Dravidians ended up going into the forest, and these were the sadhus in terms of the religion. And the religion that has come out of India, and people talk a lot about the Vedas. The Vedas are something that the Indo-Europeans brought in, but what really did, how should I say, what has come to the fore in terms of really what we think of Indian religion, and what has taken over as Indian religion, as what has come out of the Upanishads, which comes from the original Dravidians, and which ends up as Sankhya philosophy, and ends up as Vedanta, which is again what we know as the sort of Indian religion of enlightenment. And this is a religion in which Buddha arose. And if we look at the original statues of Buddha, and of course they still have them, with the curly hair. Sometimes the features now have been transformed to, quotes, Asiatic features, if you will. But that iconography still maintains itself. So we know that Buddha was a black man. Again, if you look at the early statues, and he came out of that same spirituality, religions, shall we say, that came out of Africa. And I know you know that period very well in terms of the conflict, and then the whole caste system that came out of that. And with the dominance then of Sanskrit and the European ideas with the Vedas as religion and so on, and pushing everything out, down and out into the forest, as well as into southern India. And of course, the darkest people, Indians, are in southern India and so on, as well as at the bottom of the scale in terms of the caste system in India. So we see how that has come out of Europe, and has gone to the east, has come out of Europe, and has gone to the west, if you will, all over the rest of the world. That same idea of supremacy, which is so inimical, to the advancement of people and civilization itself, because it's a claustrophobic mindset.
Yeah, let me say a little bit about that.
Yeah.
My research shows that the oldest religion in the Indian region was the worship of Lord Shiva. And the religion was called Shaivism, or if you're going to give it a modern name, you would call it Shaivism. And this is where the religion is represented as a serpent called Kundalini. And then you've got the different chakras, and each one starting at the bottom of your spine and then ending up in your pineal glands. Some people say the top of your head. Each one represents a higher and higher stage of enlightenment. And you also have, with India, the deities had male and female pairs. So you had Shiva, you had Shakti, which is the female. You also had Vishnu, male, you had Sattva, who's female, and there are many, many, many others. But this is, as you rightly say, sir, pre-Hinduism. This is not Hinduism. And as you rightly say, this is coming out of the Upanishads. And these ideas of you becoming enlightened, symbolized by, if you like, traveling up your spine to either get into the Guru Chakra. This idea, there's a whole series of religious practices that go with these religious practices. And the religious practices could be pranayama, breath control, diet, cleansing practices. meditation, correct living, and so on. And that is the oldest religion. And there seems to be evidence that we can trace that religion to the Indus Valley. And the Indus Valley civilization was definitely a Black civilization. We know that the Indus Valley civilization, sickle cell was a major problem in that civilization, because the surviving skulls show evidence of the kinds of, if you like, damage or alteration consistent with a sickle cell population. And we also can trace, in terms of languages, what was probably spoken in the Indus Valley would be related to what the Dravidians, Tamils, whatever term you want to use, are speaking. So the connection is definitely there. Now, as you rightly say, there was an Aryan conquest. My research says that took place between 2000 BC and 1500 BC. Now, a lot of Hindu scholars have tried to deny this Aryan conquest because they look at it as this is European propaganda to take their history. But as far as I know, if there was no Aryan conquest, the language spoken by the Hindu speakers would be unrelated to European. But it's not unrelated, it's related. Do you see? It's related. So as you say, the Hindu religion took a lot of the original deities and turned them around and turned them into part of a system that unfortunately one could call an early form of apartheid, based around color and shade-ism taken to the nth degree. And that system, with the appropriate modifications, is the system that's in place now. So what then happened was, because Hinduism was oppressing the dark-skinned majority, you then had large numbers of Black people saying, no, forget this. And so there's a theory that the elevation of Lord Krishna in Hinduism was to win the Black populations back to Hinduism. It was a propaganda move.
Means black in I don't know if it's in Sanskrit or whatever Indian language, right?
Yeah, correct, yeah. And I've seen images. I use an image, there's a 14th century image from one of the temples, which I use as teaching material, where Krishna is indeed jet black. And the Hindus have made Krishna an earthly manifestation of Vishnu. And that was a way of winning people back. But then the indigenous people had their own ideas, and they came with an anti-caste religion. And that's where the Buddha comes in. So he was preaching against the caste system. And then there was a time period in Indian history when the Dravidians were back in power, and they promoted Buddhism heavily. And so Buddhism became a big thing. But then as the Aryans gathered more and more strength, they were able to push Buddhism mostly out of India. So it ended up in Sri Lanka, it ended up in the Far East, because essentially, if people wanted to maintain a caste system, and here you have a new religion teaching against the caste system, they decided to stamp on it. And so it ended up in Sri Lanka. And again, I use teaching material. There's a very famous Sri Lankan city called Anuradhapura. And there's this massive image of the Buddha known as the sleeping Buddha or the reclining Buddha. And the hair is fully intact. And that needs to be seen. So if you're watching this, Google the sleeping or reclining Buddha from Anuradhapura in Sri Lanka. And yeah, we get some idea of exactly what type of hair the Buddha had. As a thank you for visiting our website, we are giving you a free copy of our exclusive 100 Black History Facts, which is in fact a taster of our course content. Make sure you leave your email address and we will send it right to you.
We hope it inspires you to dig deeper into your history and heritage.
And I think it's interesting, as you mentioned now, that Buddhism went from India throughout the rest of Asia, and you can trace it into Tibet, you can trace it into China, you can trace it into Korea, you can trace it into Japan, and you know, Padmasambhava and different Indians, Atisha, and so on, spread it throughout, and it actually joined with or replaced to some degree the original, you know, Chinese religion, if you will, of Taoism. Although, you know, the blend is really very, very similar. So I don't think there's any, you know, significant difference between the two, so to speak. The East very heavily has been influenced by this African spirituality coming out from Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, the Dravidians, the Buddhists, etc., etc., etc. And I think it has been the basis of their civilizations. And in Japan, it's mixed with Shintoism, which tends to be an older religion, but I don't think it's antagonistic, because Shintoism, I think, tends to be a sort of shamanism, kind of an earth religion. So there's not really a distinction, but I think Buddhism is much more sophisticated than Shintoism. And we know that Buddhism has been responsible for so much of the art and the intellectualism of Japan, you know, as it has been also in China and in Tibet.
And also the martial arts as well, sir.
There you go. Yeah. I was forgetting. I was forgetting that. I mean, it's been the basis of Asian culture for a long time. The discipline, the creativity, and as you mentioned, in terms of the martial arts, as part of the physical discipline, as you know, it's basically a mental discipline primarily. So that's the physical discipline aspect of it.